Hello there, croeso and welcome. I'm Shadow Lummox and today I'm going to be doing an overview of the Callisto Protocol, one of the PlayStation Plus essential games that we have been given for October. It is a third-person, heavily single-player game, and it's from the creator of Dead Space, who's moved on to create his own studio and has created a new game. Clearly has an aesthetic style that he likes when designing games, as this has a very, very serious Dead Space vibe to it. But if you're going into this game expecting a brand new Dead Space, this isn't quite what you've been given. This is very heavily narrative focused, so it can feel like a very linear game. There's only real one path to take, is next to no backtracking at all, and you don't really have that freedom of how you go about tackling the game. To some people this will be a turn off, but one of the reasons I like computer games is that it's a new medium for telling stories. So having this story focused type of game really doesn't bother me too much when compared to, say, the more open games where you're pretty much free on how you tackle the story. As I said, this is very focused, very linear, and it will definitely put a few people off. But if all you're looking for is a single player story game with a Dead Space type of vibe, then that is exactly what you get with this game. It's a horror game, but I never found it too scary. The atmosphere is good, does feel tense while you've got a sprint button. I didn't use it that often, especially when going into new areas. And you aren't some crazy super-powered soldier. You're just a starship pilot who's ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the game sort of reflects that as well. There's next to no HUD, as you can see from this gameplay going on. You've got a little health bar on your back that gets implanted into you at the beginning of the game, very similar to what Dead Space did. But beyond that, there's nothing else. There's no map, there are no quest markers, there's no invisible line to say go this way. It's figure it all out yourself, essentially, and that does add to the sort of horror survival element of the game. The main way the game plays is, as you can see, is a third-person action-adventure type of game. It's heavily melee-based. A lot of what you'll do combat-wise starts with melee, but as you can see, you've got access to firearms and you've got access to something called a grip, which is basically, essentially just force powers. Grip things, throw them about, throwing enemies into environmental hazards, as I'm doing in this section of the game here. And it all works really quite well. As I said, it's melee based, so you start off, it's R2 to use your melee weapon. One thing to be aware of is that to use your gun, you've got to use L2 to aim and then R2 to fire. There is no firing from the hip in this game, and one of the issues that you may come across with that is that when you want to switch from shooting your gun and you accidentally press it R2 again, you will swing your melee weapon. That has resulted in quite a few deaths for myself. and you'll be tasked with dodging the enemy's melee's attack using right and left on the left analog stick. There's no real timing issues to be worried about. It happens pretty automatically. You then follow up with R2 for a melee hit. After a few combos, you'll be given the opportunity then to use your pistol or use whatever firearm you have equipped to do extra damage. And the combat for the game then remains pretty much the same. Not a huge amount of variation in what you'll be doing. So again, if variety and choice are your sort of thing in a computer game, this probably isn't going to be for you. Said, very focused, very linear. The combat is pretty much the same throughout the whole game. I found it quite enjoyable, but again, that lack of choice may not be for everyone, so be aware of that. So as I started briefly going over the controls, you've got your melee on R2, aiming with L2, and then use R2 to use whatever firearm you've got equipped. If you use L2 to aim and then press X, you can use your grip arm, which you can use to pick objects up and throw them around. And you've got simple stealth mechanics just by crouching, staying out of line of sight. There are some enemies that are blind, so they are sound based. So stealth is kind of forced on you into certain sections of the games, but as you can see from this bit, it isn't always necessary. Sometimes it's best just to attack wildly. And that is essentially all there is to the game. There's places where you can upgrade your weapons and your abilities, and later on in the game you'll be given a suit very similar to the Dead Space type of suit, and you'll get extra inventory space. Inventory management is something that is a part of this game, again leading to the sort of the survival feeling of it. You aren't some crazy well-equipped soldier, you are just someone who ends up in prison at the very much the wrong time, and the game has that feeling from it throughout the entire thing. As I've said many times, these elements will not be for everyone, but for those of you who do like this sort of thing, this game is going to be very much up your street. I found that it is just a one and done type of game. So while there is stuff like New Game Plus and a dismemberment mode, I didn't feel much need to go back to play through the game again. Once I'd experienced the story, I'd basically gotten everything I needed out of it, or everything I wanted out of it, but there are things to collect, power-ups and secrets for those of you inclined for that level of exploration. So there we have it for my overview of this game. As I've said, I enjoyed what I've experienced with this game. Had a lot of fun out of it. Story was decent enough without being groundbreaking, just a standard sci-fi story about a strange outbreak in a strange location, and nothing groundbreaking or anything like that. But if that's what you're expecting from this sort of game, then you are going to be disappointed. It doesn't do anything new, but everything it does is basically what you want, what you expect. Lots of atmosphere, gruesome deaths, with some good gameplay and exploration in the middle of it. So that is the end of this video. I didn't want to go into too much detail about the story, about how things develop, how the enemies develop, because of the type of game it is, be very easy to potentially spoil a lot of what goes on in this game by going into too much detail. But I hope this overview has given you a rough idea about what sort of game this is, and if it's given you an idea about whether it's going to be the sort of game you're going to want to try. So I just want to say diolch and thank you for watching.